Good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome to the launching conference of Bridging the Chasm Between Pregnancy and Women's Health over the Life course. I'm Lois McCloskey, a faculty member at the Boston University School of Public Health, and my most amazing fellow faculty member, colleague, and co-conspirator, Dr. Judith Bernstein, right here, would like to thank you all for joining us. Those of you in this room and those of you with us via Facebook Live. Those of you who are with us, you've committed a lot of time. You've committed 2 days of your time, in fact, to work together during very busy lives and work schedules, I'm sure. And we are most grateful for that. You've come to share your expertise with each other and to generate innovative ideas that will shape a national agenda for bridging chasms. And those chasms are all within women's health care. And we're going to do that hard work together for 2 days, and we're going to have a lot of fun while we're doing it. So, what are these chasms? What are the problems that we're here to address? I'd like each of us for 10 seconds to evoke an image of a chasm. Deep, dark, often long-standing, craggy, rough, scary, downright frightening to leap across, and without a bridge or some sort of zip cord or something, very hard to leap across. And so we end up having to walk miles and miles to get around to the other side. And in this case, those miles and miles are walked by women between their pregnancy, often complicated and difficult, to the other side of care for themselves over the long term, especially right after pregnancy, but not only. So that is especially hard for women without a lot of resources, for new mothers with a lot of demands on them otherwise. That can be a very treacherous road. So, chasm number one, that's it. The deep divide between our very big investment in women while they're pregnant and our lack of investment in women after they're pregnant, between pregnancies, beyond pregnancies, especially ones that are complicated, and to care about their health over the life course for the sake of themselves. So, that's the big picture, but because it is such a giant big picture, we've chosen here today to focus on a very specific condition, gestational diabetes, and the trajectory on to type 2 diabetes and, in fact, heart disease as well. So, we know that 60% of women with, we'll call it GDM, gestational diabetes, go on to develop type 2 diabetes within the next 10 years. We know yet that most women, truly most women, do not receive either testing right after that pregnancy and certainly not beyond, and are not connected to primary care afterwards for continued care and monitoring and prevention. So we even know what the barriers are. We know that GDM is just one pathway of many that would allow us to prevent much of type 2 diabetes among women if we paid attention. It's not the only one, but it's important, and it's really important because of the growing epidemic of obesity in our country and nationally. So 1 in 10 women have a diagnosis, adult women have a diagnosis of diabetes. That rate is twice for those women who are Black, Caribbean, who are Latino, who are Native. And so the prevalence is even growing faster among women than men in our country. So tackling this gap for GDM, for women with GDM, will take us a very long way, not only to prevent type 2, but then will pave the way for other gaps, closing other gaps, and preventing other long-term health conditions among women. So that's the first chasm for the day. That's the big one. The second chasm that I want us all to be aware of as we start our work is the chasm between those who deliver and design, administer healthcare, and those who receive it. let's call us patients. We're all patients, right? So patients need a voice, and without their voice at the table of designing systems and services that work for women, that walk around the chasm is going to be extremely circuitous, bureaucratic, as it is, and often that walk is just not even worth it for women, especially women, again, with lower resources. Chasm number 3. That's the one between the resources we have available to women who are from high resource communities and those from lower resource communities. Every community we know has lots and lots of assets. But women cannot, at least not easily, change their diet, change their exercise, and take care of themselves while holding double, triple jobs to make a living wage, experiencing the implicit bias that we know is kind of baked into healthcare often. Institutional racism baked into our housing policies and access to safe environments, to healthy food that's affordable. So place really matters, and racism really matters. We know that. Chasm number 4. This is the last chasm that I'll talk about anyway. That's the one between what we know and what we do. So I know from talking to many of you that you're tired, as I'm tired, of knowing so much about what we need to do and not doing it. So, for GDM, for example, we know all about the disease process. We know even about how we fail women to not follow up. Like I said, we know what the barriers are. We know how to prevent type 2 diabetes. And we do make some good attempts, incremental as they are, to try to help women change their behaviors, but most of our attempts are in fact just that, attempts to change individuals' behaviors. So, where's the deeper change? The deeper change in the system, the recognition of the communities that need to change in order for, and the system, which is more also where our focus is today, needs to change for this chasm to be crossed. So, let's all now evoke a different image, an image of a very strong, sturdy, reliable bridge across that chasm. And let's envision women walking across that bridge before they're pregnant, during, after, and long beyond, much as our logo, beautifully designed by Megan Smith, conveys. Building bridges like that is hard. I'm called to remember bridges across really big, narrow, scary chasms in rural Nepal, where I had my very first public health job. And I couldn't even believe bridges were built across these chasms. Like, who could do that? They were swinging and rickety and scary, but nonetheless, bridges across a chasm. And those took a village to build. And it's really no different for us. It's going to take a village. A village with rich and varied experience and expertise, because it's complex, and complex problems call for innovation and collaboration and all kinds of multi-pronged solutions. And that's why we're here. That's why you're here. And thank you again for being here. Patients, providers, researchers, advocates, health systems leaders, policy and program planners. It's going to take all of us and more. It's going to take those of you and us who have been paying attention and trying to get attention on issues like the incredibly unacceptable high rates of Black maternal mortality. And finally getting a little traction in the public press about that. Those of you who are here because you've worked on perinatal depression legislation to get support for women after pregnancy, or those who fight for respectful maternity care, or in fact, many of you researched gestational diabetes and the problems of follow-up. So we have a lot to learn from each other, and we're not doing this work in a very positive political environment, are we? And that's all the more reason why we have to be here with each other together, going forward, and think really creatively. So in the next 2 days, obviously we can't build the bridge, we can't even fully design it, but we're going to give it a go and we're going to start to design it. By the end of our 2 days together, we will have shared stories with each other across our areas of expertise and experience. We will have brainstormed solutions, and we will have chosen some of those solutions that seem to us collectively to be the most innovative and the most promising. And then we're going to go at it and see what the challenges would be, what the resources, what collaborations are needed to make them happen. Could they happen? And begin to talk about how they could happen. And this will be the national agenda that we've promised to begin work on in these next 2 days and continue our work. This is not going to be the end. In fact, we hope all of you will continue to be part of the Bridging the Chasm network, that we, excuse me, have support to continue at least for the next year, we hope more, excuse me, through an online portal. So keep your eyes open, everyone out there in Facebook land as well, for bridge-the-chasm.com. It's coming to you early this fall. So we hope that will be the stage, the platform upon which many of you will begin to collaborate with each other. As Peter Senge, the organizational leadership guru, tells us, everybody wants to focus on pressing problems, but usually it's as they define them. But in facing truly complex problems, no one sees the whole. We all see only portions of the larger system, and this is not bad. In fact, it's human. And so it is that we've chosen to work today together, in day one especially, to be very human together, to share our stories, to even do some improvisational theater. The art we're going to use to get us out of our linear ways of thinking and into our imaginations. So, let me end there and begin to introduce those who have been with us all the way along the way to make this conference and this initiative happen. And I'm going to start by introducing our Stakeholder Leadership Council. You'll notice that each person I'm about to introduce has a gold star that go on their name tag, and that gold star is because they do A+ work, and also because we want you to be able to recognize who they are. So please stand when I mention you. First are those who represent the community and patient advocacy constituency. Linda Goller-Blount, there you are. Executive Director of the Black Women's Health Imperative. We will hear from Linda in just a bit as our first panelist, so I won't say more about you or the Black Women's Health Imperative. Second is Athena Ramos, who wasn't able to be with us today. She's representing the National Alliance for Hispanic Health, but she just had a baby. Yeah, congratulations, Athena. Her fourth, actually. And third, we're joined by Anna Norton and Sarah Martin from Diabetes Sisters. Unfortunately, Anna's not able to be with us, but we're so glad you are, Sarah. Where are you? There you are. And joined by many diabetes sisters who are here with us, and we thank you for coming from all over the country. Corinna from Hawaii. Is that amazing? And Sarah, I would love you to take just one moment to tell us what Diabetes Sisters is.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Diabetes Sisters is our tiny but strong and thriving nonprofit serving women with every and any type of diabetes across the lifespan, and working for them to increase both their health and quality of life through our plethora of online services, diabetessisters.org, as well as in-person peer support groups. We have about 45 so far across the country. And as Lois said, we have 7 members of our Diabetes Sisters patient advocate community here in the room with us today, and we're so thrilled that they could join us.
Thank you, Sarah. I also wanted to mention, as I was introducing Linda, the Black Women's Health Imperative, as well as those from BMC, we have lots of patients here representing those two groups, and we welcome you as well, and really look forward to working with you and hearing stories as the day goes on. Next is the representative from Health Policy and Research, Dr. Janine Austin-Clayton, Director of Women's Health for NIH and the Office of Research on Women's Health. Hi, Dr. Clayton. You will also be hearing from her in a moment, so no more. We'll hear from you later. And representing Health Systems Transformation stakeholder is Ann Greiner, President and CEO of Patient-Centered Primary Care Collaborative. Just a sentence or so, Ann, about your group.
Good morning, everyone. We're based in Washington, D.C., and we're focused on making primary care more robust and more patient-centered. We help to garner consensus around the patient-centered medical home model and fostered its adoption by both public and private payers.
And our final partners are from Boston University. Dr. Aviva Lee Peretz, Chair of OBGYN and an expert in diabetes. Welcome. And Tracy Battaglia, our head of our Women's Health Unit at BU in General Internal Medicine, unfortunately was unable to be here today. And then Linda Sprague-Martinez from the School of Social Work, an avid PCORI, patient-centered and community-centered action researcher. And then two more. Susie Sarfady may not be quite here yet. She and Chase Crossnote. Susie's from BU in Assistant Dean for Community and Global Health Programs and is a primary care physician and also a communications specialist. And then Chase Crossnote from the University of North Texas and Texas Christian University Medical School. And I'll be introducing Chase because she is our fabulous leader for the improvisational work we're going to do. I'll introduce you later. So finally, our most generous funders, not just the agencies, but the people who've made this happen in the end. First, we have a PCORI grant. For those who don't know, Patient-Centered Outcome Research Initiative. We have a Eugene Washington Conference grant, and they have in fact given us the bulk of the funding. Their mission is all about patient engagement to improve health outcomes. Our wonderful program officer, Yasmin Long, unfortunately wasn't able to make the trip. She sends her regrets. NIH, NIDDK. So we want to call out Dr. Drew Bremer. There you are.
I will stand, but hello everyone.
Drew represents the most forward-thinking of program officers at the NIH, we can tell you. Right? Embedded in our proposal to conduct a big data analysis of follow-up after GDM, we stuck in this little conference, an initiative to, in very innovative ways, to come up with some solutions and disseminate results. And you saw the vision, Drew, early on, and allowed that to stay in the proposal after we were funded. Thank you very much. And then continued to do some outreach to make sure we got even more funding. And that's when you reached out to Dr. Janine Clayton, who stepped right up and added some funds from the Office of Research on Women's Health. We are so grateful to you, Dr. Clayton. You're leading the way to a more holistic and cross-disciplinary, forward-thinking approach on research, about research in women's health. And now I want to invite you to come and make some welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. It's really my pleasure to be here joining all of you, and I'm looking forward to an incredible day. I'm going to say I'm looking forward to an invigorating discussion, out-of-the-box thinking, and just incredibly creative interactions. And so we're, buckle up, put your seatbelt on, because this is going to be a fantastic day. Pregnancy is a nearly universal experience for women. 8 out of 10 women in this country will be pregnant at some point in their lives, and it's a very special time. But it also has unique and dynamic physiologic changes associated with it. And chronic conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, and obesity, if left untreated, are directly associated with pregnancy-related issues, morbidity. In turn, complications experienced during pregnancy, as you heard earlier, can portend the future health of women. You also heard from Dr. McCloskey that over half of the women who develop gestational diabetes, GDM, during their pregnancy will develop type 2 diabetes 5 to 10 years later, putting them at risk for heart disease and stroke. And pregnant women who experience pregnancy-induced hypertension or preeclampsia double their risk for stroke and quadruple their risk of high blood pressure later in life. Also, women who have very low birth weight babies or other complications during pregnancy have a several-fold increased risk of mortality from cardiovascular causes later in life. And you'll hear from some of the speakers that the United States has a very high maternal mortality rate compared to our peer countries. Ours is increasing, theirs is decreasing. This is even more alarming, as you heard from Lois, because of the racial and ethnic fault lines that we see. African American mothers die at 3 times the rate of white mothers. Clearly, we must act. Clearly, we've got to do a better job at connecting dots. We must unsilo the many health services that women access, including primary care, urology, endocrinology, OBGYN, cardiovascular care, to name a few. We have to address the barriers to identifying and treating women with chronic conditions before pregnancy, long before pregnancy, and in turn, through pregnancy and afterwards. At the research level, we must employ a multi-dimensional approach and support research that intentionally and deliberately integrates all of these issues, bridges all of these chasms, and includes a focus on sex and gender. I'm going to tell you just briefly a little bit about some of the ORWH efforts here. By studying sex, and we mean being male or female, and accounting for that across the entire biomedical research spectrum, examining those internal influences from being male or female at the level of the molecule, at the cellular level, at the level of organs, in those studies before the clinic, preclinical, as well as in the clinic. But by studying gender as well, we mean unpacking the complex, multi-layered external factors that affect women's health as a lived experience. These include, but are not limited to, the competing expectations that come from our role as women, as workers, as caretakers, as mothers, as daughters, as sisters, as aunties, as community members, and everything in between. As well as policies and regulations that affect our ability to contribute to the workforce. Environmental and structural factors, organizational dynamics, including issues related to where we live, where we work, how much money we make, our educational access, all of which can have profound and indelible consequences on the health of women across our lifespan. And lastly, behavioral and lifestyle factors like sleep, social interaction, how much we move, how much we exercise, and our use of alcohol, tobacco, and drugs as well. That can either serve as risk or protective factors later in life. We clearly must also bring a life course approach, and the logo that Dr. Lofty highlighted really brings that image in mind. By that we mean viewing women's health as certainly stretching from all the way to that woman's in utero experience in her mother, to conception, adolescence, pregnancy, and early and late adulthood across the entire lifespan, because experiences in one phase of a woman's life clearly can have cascading effects to other phases. And at ORWH, the Office of Research on Women's Health at NIH, we have a threefold mission: expanding women's health research, making sure women are included and diverse populations are included in NIH-supported clinical research, and promoting women advancing in STEM careers or biomedical careers. We have a new vision, and that is threefold again. The first is that sex and gender influences are integrated into the biomedical research continuum. Every woman receives evidence-based disease prevention and treatment tailored to her own needs, circumstances, and goals. And then women in science reach their full potential. We believe that exciting things lay ahead, and we're optimistic about that road. So we need more meetings like this. This two-day conference provides us with a rare opportunity to step back and reflect and to let ourselves imagine. To reflect on how we listen, to whom we listen, how we synthesize information and account for what is missing, and how we communicate. Unpacking how we really do what we do, how we respond or choose not to respond, are all critically important if we seek to bridge the chasm across the health of women during pregnancy and their entire lives. It's critically important if we're going to bridge that chasm as well as the chasm involving many sectors, many disciplines, many fields, and many ways of thinking. So at the end of these 2 days, I hope to see unlocked new possibilities and unleashed new energy focused to benefit the health of women. Thank you.
First, I want to introduce Linda Goler-Blount, who I mentioned earlier. She's president and CEO of Black Women's Health Imperative. Her talk, as you are about to see, is called Transform the Narrative of Women's Health, Keeping Women and Their Communities at the Center. So, Linda is the, as I said, president and CEO of the only existing in this country organization completely dedicated to Black women's health, emotional, physical, mental, financial health. Quite remarkable. And Linda leads a really vibrant organization. Check them out on the website. It's an amazing website. And what you'll notice is that Linda is known there as the Black Magic Woman. Do I have that right? And for a really good reason, as you're about to experience. Linda, welcome.
Good morning. I am so happy to be here and so excited about all the work that you all are about to do. When we had some planning sessions, of course, leading up to this, Lois assured me that in this room, we solve the problems of the world. So we have until tomorrow afternoon. Press will be waiting outside to do the interviews, so get ready. Thank you for letting me be here. Just a little bit about the Black Women's Health Imperative. As Lois said, we're the only national organization with this focus on Black women's health. And for 35 years, we've been the only one, which is, for me, both frightening and saddening to think that after 35 years, there's still only one national organization with this focus. But it's also very daunting, because there's a lot to do. So we spend a lot of time translating research into language the everyday woman can understand, so she knows what to do. We spend a lot of time translating research into policy and providing evidence to policymakers so they too hopefully know what to do. And we invest in programs across the country so that we can hopefully give Black women the information, the tools, the resources they need to do what they want to do anyway, which is to be as healthy as they possibly can, to help them understand that there are very real barriers and that the poor health that we talk about among Black women, among Latinas, among Native women and other women is not their fault, because that's the message that they get. So, let's see, I want to start here. What brings me here? 2 months ago, my daughter Stephanie got married. 2 years ago, my son Joe got married. So Steph married Joe, Joe married Laura. Stephanie's middle name is Laura. So I figure I can call any name, somebody's gonna answer. But I say this because both Steph and Laura are gonna be thinking about having children soon. And I have to really be careful because of what I know. I don't want to make them crazy. but Laura is of Filipino descent. And so her risk for gestational diabetes is high. Stephanie is a well-educated, upper middle class black woman. Her risk for dying after childbirth is really high. I can't say this to these girls, but you can bet that when I get the call that they're pregnant, I'm going to be like this. So I'm happy to be here so that we can do the work that needs to be done so that I don't have to worry about Steph and Laura, and that you don't have to worry about the other young women in your lives. Okay. So, hopefully these slides will just run and I won't have to pay much attention to this. But what I want to talk about is the opportunity to change the narrative, to begin this conversation, and I like the Zora Neale Hurston quote, about why we're here. So we need to change this narrative about women and their health and their values. I don't know if any of you noticed that there are some people in this dome building that's down the street from our offices in DC who don't seem to care much about women. Okay, and these slides are going much too fast, so we'll figure out how to make that work. And what I want you all to think about is what we bring to our healthcare experience. So we can do that by putting women really at the center of the conversation. We can start by honoring the women who came before us, these women in these slides, who did the really hard work to get the conversation going. And talk about the women who fought to make sure that we had access to prenatal care, who wondered why women were dying in childbirth and right after childbirth. The women who looked at systems of care delivery and said, well, what's happening in the exam room? What's happening when women go to the pharmacy? What's happening when they go online and look for health information? And I want us to think about the research and those people who finally decided that there was a difference between women and men, and male and female, that when they were doing initial experimentation with mice, they didn't need to only have male mice, that somehow female mice were important. And that those who decided that being black is not a risk factor, that ethnicity is important, and that black women don't have whatever it is they have because they're black. It's because of the experience of being black in the society. And I want to think about the people who understood this and considered this in research and thought that perhaps the lived experiences, as Janine mentioned, were really important in research. And I also want us to know that researchers bring their own lived experiences to their work. So what questions get asked? Who asks the questions? What becomes what we call evidence depends on who's funded to do the work and what their interest is. So we've got to think about what we mean when we say evidence. We in public health talk about evidence, but what are we really talking about? So here's the current narrative. We have an HPV vaccine that's not as effective in black girls because it doesn't address some of the strains that are more common in black girls. Breast cancer incidence is rising among black women. Why? And yet, we've got 28% or so of breast cancer that occur in black women occur in women younger than 50. But the Preventive Services Task Force, the American Cancer Society, has said, oh, let's raise the age of screening mammography to 50. Based on studies done in Sweden and Canada, where I'm guessing there weren't that many black women. But that's evidence. 40 million women are at risk, are pre-diabetic and at risk for developing diabetes. And yet, when we applied for our most recent diabetes prevention grant from CDC, we had to word it so that we couldn't actually say African American. You couldn't say Hispanic, Latino. You had to come up with these euphemisms for describing the populations you're going to work on. Whereas 4 years ago when we did it, we could be very explicit about who we were intending to work with and focus on. The life expectancy of whites is dropping. We've all read that. So we've got young children now who are being left behind, left without mothers because of suicide or opioid misuse, and opioid misuse combined with anti-anxiety drugs. This is really scary. So, and these are women who actually have resources. Can you imagine the low-income woman who's got to choose between trying to work to get her Medicaid so that she can get treatment for her substance abuse issues? So all of this is sort of against the backdrop. I mean, one would think this would be a national priority with opioid misuse is in the news all the time. You would think this would be a national priority, and yet the Office of Women's Health, after 1.5 years, still doesn't have a director. In clinical trials, in clinical research, we get requests all the time. Could you provide women for our clinical trial? My answer is always no. I said, I don't run a talent agency. But I'm happy to talk about why you are calling me in the first place, because you can't find Black women or Latinas to be in your clinical trial. So far, no one has taken me up on that offer. And we get requests all the time to tailor materials. Well, we've got this campaign, we'd like you to tailor the materials. And again, my answer is always no. If you didn't design those materials for Black women with Black women in mind in the first place, or Latinas in mind in the first place, then we can't go back and swap out the pictures and make them okay. That's not how it works. And then there's maternal mortality. Lois mentioned, Janine mentioned, everybody's going to talk about this. And Janine gave you some statistics. One, I'll just put a finer point on it. In New York, the Black-white difference is 12 times in New York City. So we've known this for a long time. There's research. Arlene Geronimus, Tanae Lewis, Fleeta Matz Jackson, the Black Women's Health Study have all looked at toxic environmental stress, the experience of being a Black woman, and what that means for low birth weight babies, for maternal mortality, for gestational diabetes. And yet, here we are, still having this conversation, and Arlene Geronimus' research goes back to 1994. So it's not like we're just finding this out. So Stephen Covey said, and I'm not a huge Covey fan, but it seemed appropriate today, when talking about sort of coming up with a new narrative. He said, start with the end in mind. So I say start with women in mind. All women, Black, white, Hispanic, Native, young, old, rich, poor, Asian. Start with what they bring to this. And as you all think about your work today and tomorrow, just always center the woman. What would she think? What does she bring? What does this mean for her? Consider her lived experiences. A friend of mine said to me not too long ago, women aren't crazy. But we in public health and medicine sometimes treat women like they're crazy. Well, why don't they just eat right? Why don't they exercise? Why don't they? Well, the fact is whoever they is, are doing their best. They're living their lives, they're doing their best, they're really trying. But they also live in an environment that makes that a real challenge. They're caring, as Jenny mentioned, they're caring for families, they're working multiple jobs, they might be the sole breadwinner, and they want to do things to make them, to be as healthy as possible. And they're making the best decisions they can. So at the end of the day, though, we all do what we value. And we talk about behavior change. Well, the key to behavior change is make the benefit of that changed behavior greater than the cost of not changing. And it works. My mother smoked for 30 years. When my brother had the first grandchild, his wife had the first grandchild, she came to visit. He said, Mom, you can't smoke. She never touched another cigarette after that. Didn't care, didn't miss it. Because the value of being with that grandbaby was much higher than whatever benefit she was getting from smoking. That's the easy stuff. The hard part, though, is how to make the value of women so important that systems of care and education and wealth and revenue generation change. How do you make that happen? Because that's that's the chasm. So you all are here to help bridge this chasm, one that drops women off right after childbirth, one that separates them from basic health care, one that separates them from their ability to make the best health care decisions, and one that keeps them out of research and keeps them out of what we call evidence. So we need to have an army of women and men in this work. But what I say is we need street fighters with a vocabulary. So to keep women up front and center, at the middle of the conversation, to understand what it is about their lives that can help them be healthy. And I need us all to work together to do that so that Serena won't have to worry with her next child. So Kira Johnson and Shalona Irving's mothers won't have to worry that their daughters died in vain. So that I don't have to worry about Steph and Laura. So that every woman and girl can know that the care she receives is based in science and practice that began with her in mind first. So I'm excited to be here. The panel is amazing. They let me come. The panel's fantastic. But I'm really excited about all the work that you're going to do. Lois, thank you for bringing us together to have this exchange of ideas. And I just want to take a quick poll. So who in this room thinks anything is wrong with women? Right. And yet the message we get is something's wrong. This woman knows that's not the case. Thank you.
And next I'd like to introduce Dr. Felissa DeRose. She is a Fulbright alum and a professor of American literature in several places around the world. She's here today representing a patient, much more than a patient, of course. She comes to us through Diabetes Sisters. You learned about that community of women who share the experience of diabetes. And Felissa, I'm making these intros real short, but again, please, just a keystroke away. She's quite a remarkable woman and is quite a blogger, and that's where you can learn even more about Felissa. But most of all today, you're here, Felissa, to share with us your perspective and your story, and we're very grateful for that. Welcome.
So I want to first start off by saying that I'm going to share something with you today that I've never shared with anyone. And as I was preparing notes for my talk today, I still couldn't find the words. So I'm determined to get there. But if I stumble along the way, just be with me. There are 2 points to my talk that I want you to pay attention to. The first is I'm going to read you a haiku poem. I'm going to start my talk off with a haiku poem, and I'm going to end it with the same poem. It's a clue when you hear it the second time, you'll know I'm finished with my talk. And the second is throughout my talk, I'm going to ask a series of questions that start off with what if. So if you want to jot those down or remember them, please do. They'll help facilitate part of our discussion today. The haiku poem is entitled My Birthing Experience, and it goes like this. Entered hospital, a warrior, but returned a wounded soldier. I'll share with you my birthing experience, but first I'll start off by telling you a little bit about 2011. Walk with me. January 2011, I had finished my doctorate. I was feeling like I was on top of the world. You couldn't tell me anything. I had finally reached my dream of being a literature professor. I was on my first job, and I was working out. I hadn't reached my goal weight, but I had lost 50 pounds. I was eating healthy. I remember looking in the mirror that January one random day and saying, like, I'm here. Like mentally, physically, I'm at the place that I've strived to be for so long. And then February came, and when February came, it brought with it a couple of things. It brought with it extreme thirst, frequent urination, blurred vision. And so, because I had just moved, I said, well, I need to go see a primary care physician. And I did, and I told her, I said, I'm new to the city, but I'm constantly going to the bathroom and I'm really thirsty. Matter of fact, I've had to move my position in church because I'm a front row kind of person. And so I told her, I said, well, you know, I have to now sit in the back of the church near the restroom. And so I was explaining this to her, and she went down the list, no family history of anything except cholesterol, young woman, working out, your electrolytes are off. You need to drink Gatorade. I did. A week later, I had all my classic symptoms that I had before, but now they've increased, and they brought a couple of friends along with them. And those friends included the inability to maintain a conversation without saying some things. So I was experiencing cognitive issues. And the straw that broke the camel's back for me was when I passed out of my bathtub for an unknown amount of time. I woke up, I packed a bag, and I said, I'm not coming back to my home until someone tells me what's wrong with me. So I go to the primary care physician February 15th, and I say to her, Gatorade didn't cure me, and something is really wrong. And so she checks my blood sugar, it registers high, no number. She runs out, she comes back with a needle. Her assistant says, your glucose isn't registering and that's not a good thing. I mean, first of all, I never want to have a medical person whisper anything to me. To be clear. So, when she says, your glucose isn't registering, that's not a good, and I was like, oh my God, why are we whispering, you know? So then I whispered to my mother. I pick up my phone and I call my mother, who's a nurse in Florida, and I say, you know, they say my glucose isn't registering, that's not a good thing. And my mother says, no, it's not, you need to go to the emergency room. When the physician comes back in with a needle, she's telling me, like, I need to take it, but I'm thinking, well, last week you told me about Gatorade, and that one didn't work out, so I don't know about this needle. And my mom said, I need to go to the emergency room. She and I go back and forth. She makes me sign a waiver saying that I was going to the emergency room against her wishes. I call a colleague who drives me to the emergency room. By the time I get there, I can no longer walk and stand. I'm dying, and I don't know from what. And the triage nurse says to me, how long have you had diabetes? And I said, diabetes? I didn't have diabetes. And I mean, she said it so calm, like we're cousins. Like, how long have you had diabetes? You know? And so I said, I didn't have diabetes. She said, yes, you do. I said, no, I don't. And we go back and forth, and then finally she picks up this huge glucometer. At the time, I had no idea what it was. But she said, you see this number, 593? Not only do you have diabetes, but you're going into a coma. That's why you passed out last night. And so everything I know about diabetes rushes in my head. And what I know about diabetes is that I'm going to die, I'm going to go blind, I'm going to be on dialysis, and I'm going to have an amputation. This is what I know. So I start screaming at the top of my lungs, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. I'm alone, scared, terrified. And so I asked, what if? What if my primary care physician had just checked my blood sugar when I saw her the first time? What if the images and the messages about diabetes wasn't death, blindness, amputation, dialysis, all this negative stuff? How would I have felt in the emergency room? probably not extremely terrified and alone and confused. I spent 10 days in the hospital. I started blogging shortly after that, trying to find a community, because the pamphlets were not very comforting for me. The pamphlets had images that I couldn't relate to. Number one, everyone was over 50. I was a young person. Two, they said like, oh, you get diabetes because you're fat and lazy, but I was working out and I wasn't fat and lazy, and I just didn't understand. So a nurse came in and said, looks like you haven't looked through the pamphlets. And I said, well, I looked at them, but there's nothing hopeful in them. I said, every time I flip a page, it tells me that African Americans get amputations more than someone else. African Americans get blindness more than someone else. I said, these pamphlets are telling me because I'm a black person, like, I'm gonna die from diabetes. I said, that's not helpful for me. So my education about diabetes really didn't begin until I left the hospital. And I started searching online, and I found the diabetes online community. And I found diabetes sisters and people that were living with diabetes and smiling and enjoying life. And so I began to blog because what I noticed in all of those images too, that there was an absence of black women. And so I didn't start off with that idea, but I became the most prominent African American black woman blogger with type 2 diabetes. And I remember getting everything well. So I want to fast forward now. 60 days after that, I came home one day and I lost my home in a tornado. So I had to figure out how to manage being newly diagnosed with diabetes and having nothing. Not even a home, not a refrigerator for my insulin. Fast forward from that, it was the fall of 2011. I was now back in a home, feeling okay, starting a new semester. And I remember that I had a fibroid, but I hadn't had it checked for about a year and a half. So I decided, let me go to a gynecologist and see what's the status of my thyroid. Since I'm new, I don't know which gynecologist to pick, so I just say first come, first served. I'm fine with it. I go to my appointment, and the doctor comes in, and he opens my chart, and he says, I see you have diabetes. Are you here for birth control? I said, no. And he said, oh, okay, what are you here for? And I said, well, I have a fibroid. I haven't had it looked at in a year and a half. I want to know, like, the status of it. Has it grown or, whatever? Oh, okay. Are you sure you don't want birth control? And I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I don't want birth control. And he said, well, when you have diabetes and you're pregnant, your baby can have birth defects. And, like, he starts rattling off all of these abnormalities that can happen. And at the time this happened, I was living in North Carolina, and the state of North Carolina had just decided to pay the women who had been forcefully sterilized systematically in North Carolina. And while I went into that meeting as a woman who wants to know about her fibroid, that space quickly turned for me into a space where now I'm a black woman and a white gynecologist male is trying to give me birth control. And I didn't have the words to express what that did to me, but I had the sense enough to say, this appointment is over. But I could not let him touch me. So I walked outside in my car and I cried because I came for care and I didn't leave with any care. I left emotionally worse off than I started when I got there. When I did decide that I wanted to be a mother, it was 2014, and thank God I got pregnant. I was so happy. And my journey through pregnancy was pretty okay. No real issues. Oh, I do want to get to my what if for that one. What if that physician, when I went to him, did not try to put me on birth control, but he asked, are you thinking about motherhood? And if you are, here are resources for you to prepare yourself. What if he had said that? My favorite what if is, what if he had asked me, you have diabetes, what's your A1C? Because you know what my answer would have been? Better than yours. because it was 5.4 and 5.5 at that time. I was living med-free diet and exercise, but he never asked what my A1C was. Never. So 2014, I am pregnant. Everything's going well. I have a couple of hypos, too many, I would say. But other than that, my pregnancy was fine. And the day that I went in to have my baby, I have a friend, she's a midwife in Texas, Happy. She told me that I needed to enter that room with a feminine energy. She knows I'm Christian, like Jesus gonna be in that room, right? So she was like, I know you're gonna bring Jesus in the room, but I need you to also bring a feminine energy in there too. So I said, okay. So she helped me prepare. One of the things that I did was I had an outfit made, and I have on a piece of it today. I put this on to help me share my story. And I actually, I've only worn it twice, both times this year since then, because I decided I'm determined to heal from my birthing experience. And so I decided to bring in Hatshepsut, a female pharaoh who had won many battles. She even dressed like a man to make sure. And so I thought, like, I'm gonna be a warrior, right? That was the energy that I brought into the room. And it was a long birthing process. I had gone through a couple of OBGYNs, and the one that I was given during the birth, I went down my list of things, and I told her I didn't want an epidural, I didn't want a C-section unless it was necessary. And she returned my response by saying, we'll see about that. And so from that point where she said, we'll see about that, I thought, oh, okay, I don't know how that's gonna go. 32 hours later, I delivered my daughter in an emotion that I had fought for so long to avoid, and that is fear. She was determined to have a C-section. I was on Pitocin. I remember being very scared when this happened. When she said to her assistant, we need an IV. I had an IV in this hand, and I had an IV in this hand. And so whenever I had a contraction, I couldn't even do this. I couldn't even. When I asked, why do I have an IV in both of my hands? She said, because you're pregnant with diabetes. And because you're pregnant with diabetes, we can't let you move. So I'm pregnant with diabetes, trying to have a baby, and I can't even move. So I felt constrained and felt, like almost being chained. And so I said to her, well, because I have diabetes, I shouldn't not have a regular birth. And I told her, I said, I have a particular idea of this experience. I got an outfit made. I came in here as a warrior, right? And she just said, okay. And that was it. I didn't feel like she cared about me. I felt like she just cared about getting my daughter out. And throughout that experience, I ended up going into the OR to have a C-section. She told me that she was gonna use a suction, and she would only do it twice, and if my daughter didn't come out on that second time, then I would have a C-section. My husband and I were separated, and so I was in there by myself. And the fortunate thing happened was that the epidural wore off, and she pulled the suction, and I felt it. She didn't say anything to me. And I told myself, Felissa, the next time you feel that you have to push because this lady doesn't care about you. And to say this lady, like she's a woman, right? And so when I felt her pull the suction, I pushed, and I pushed my daughter out. but I was so scared. And that was the emotion that I fought so hard to avoid. I had listened to hypnobirthing and, all of these kinds of things to prepare myself. And so I often ask, what if she had put me first? What if she had asked me what my wishes were? And afterwards, I asked about my care with diabetes, and I was just told, oh, just go back to doing your regular thing. I didn't know what that meant, and I'm like, okay, just life is gonna be normal, after that. And so while I didn't develop diabetes from the gestational point, I came in and I experienced pregnancy with diabetes. And to be left alone after that, it was hard for me. And I often ask myself, what if someone had asked, what is your family history like with pregnancy? They would have known that I lost a grandmother after she had my uncle. And so pregnancy, there was always this association that I could die. And I ended up leaving that experience. I had a 3rd-degree burn near my vagina that was unexplained even to this day. I left that experience having hemorrhoids so bad that I've had 2 surgeries from that. And I felt very alone throughout the experience in terms of care. I needed someone to care about me. So I often ask, what if someone had just taken the time to ask me emotionally how I'm doing? Because my daughter's 3 now, and I'm still having a postpartum experience. Because it took me 2 years to heal from the birthing experience. And so I entered the hospital a warrior, but I left a wounded soldier.
Dr. Brown, Dr. Haywood Brown, who's about to speak to us, is going to bring some hope, I think, some promise, and some inspiration to us. He is the immediate past president of the American College of OBGYN and has just left Duke University as the chair of OBGYN and gone to a most interesting position at the University of South Florida, where he's vice president for diversity, inclusion, biology, and equal opportunity. His talk is called Bridge the Chasm, the case for changing the paradigm for postpartum care and beyond. That's kind of a fancy title for what I know he's going to do, which is to describe some pioneering work he has led with obstetricians and gynecologists around the country, and others, in fact, making connections to primary care. So thank you for being here and for offering us your perspective, Dr. Brown.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you so much, and again, that is indeed hard to follow. I'm going to use some things, and the first thing I want to say is, when I come to a meeting, and I can look out in the audience and see people that I know, or more specifically, people that I've trained, it even gives me greater energy. So Dr. Andy Duty, who's now an assistant professor at the University of Chicago in maternal fetal medicine, is here. And the reason this is such a pertinent story is, when she was an intern, I redesigned our postpartum clinic. And so she was one of the inaugural redesign of postpartum care, geared toward seeing people earlier and doing the type of follow-up and education that the postpartum visit was supposed to be about. So after about a decade or so of this, when I became president of ACOG, I made this my theme, redesigning the paradigm of postpartum care, with pregnancy being the gateway to long-term health. And so the relationships that I've made with this in my task force was about developing a thought process. Now, I hear the stories that were told here, and Annie also knows one of my other themes used to be in clinic, that 99.9% of prenatal care is caring. Caring. And so I passed that theme along in my 35 years of being a practicing maternal fetal medicine specialist, but also consider myself a generalist in obstetrics and gynecology, and hence my theme for long-term health. So why is it so important to address the postpartum period? And what I say to people now is, if the woman has no idea why she's supposed to come in for her postpartum visit, and the provider could care less whether she shows up for a postpartum visit, because they've already been paid for that in the bundled payment, then how do you change that so that it decides to have the relevance that it needs? So it is by design that only 50% of women, even with resources, see a reason to go. And then for those women who are underserved, who may have transportation issues, child care issues, barrier issues, and hearing the story about contraceptive, paradigms, that it's even not surprising that only 40% of women who are attending a public health clinic for their prenatal care will show up for that postpartum visit. But here are the ramifications. The ramifications for not showing up is that it contributes to health disparities. And if you've had a premature baby, and your risk for having a recurrent premature baby is already 30% because you had one premature baby, and you don't get education about that risk or the availability for having a medication like a progesterone to prevent that, you've lost the game. If you've had an infant that was stillborn, or the infant that has died within the first year of life, lack of follow-up is a factor. If you've had gestational diabetes and you don't follow up, you can't be tested and screened for long-term diabetes. And we know we're going to talk about that because the data is out there about the few women who actually get tested or get tested properly. If you have undiagnosed postpartum depression or anxiety or post-delivery post-traumatic stress, which we now recognize occurs after postpartum hemorrhages, after postpartum eclampsia, etc., preeclampsia, and with diabetes, and bad experiences at birth. If you don't show up to talk about it, to be energized about it, to interact about it, it carries on for years. So these are the ramifications, first of all, for lack of follow-up. The postpartum period is the fourth trimester, a time of rapid adaptation. Hormonal changes, physical changes, social changes, psychological changes. Everybody's at the delivery, mostly, the family, everybody's happy. And then the partner goes back to work, the mother goes back to her home, and about 2 or 3 weeks later, the new mother is alone with a baby. She is feeling bad because the breastfeeding is not going well. She is adjusting to the fact that she may have had a cesarean and has to go up and down steps. You get it. She may have had a postpartum bleed and has a hemoglobin of only 6 or 7. And she's expected to just be happy. Enjoy the experience of being a new mother. And so when I move around the world and I do these discussions, and I am in countries like China, where one of my colleagues there was about to have her baby as a maternal fetal medicine specialist. Her mother had already moved in and was going to be there for 6 months to teach her how to be a mother, to help her to adapt and to anything. And also, by the way, she was going to be there at home with the baby and her mother for 3 months, because that's built into the system. Or when I'm in the Middle East, the same thing happens. And so the bottom line is cultures do it differently. Challenges of postpartum period are fatigue, breastfeeding, learning to care for a newborn. But most important, if you have a pre-existing medical condition like diabetes, like I've heard, dealing with that in the postpartum period, and yes, there are some issues that you should have known. We can talk about that after. Before you can have your first late preconception visit with me for free. Hospital discharge planning and care. You know, we go in and we round on the patient at 6 o'clock in the morning. We wake her up. We'll send the medical student and the intern, in my case, in to do her postpartum discharge planning. We have our piece of paper and say, okay, come back and see me in 6 weeks. You make the appointment. One of my people don't show up. No one goes down and sits down and talks to the patient about the issues. And so what we decided to do was to hire a advanced women's nurse practitioner in my setting to round on everybody. She makes the appointment, she interacts with them, she does all those type of things, and she talks to them about what to expect when you get home. Hence the reason to design postpartum care. I'm going to start by changing some paradigms because the disparity in breastfeeding is significant. And we just went through this whole World Health Organization and how the United States kind of just did what it did, and I'm not even going to get there politically and so forth and so on because it would be too painful. But you know, we know there's already disparity in breastfeeding for African American women. And so my goal with my postpartum task force is to figure out how to increase that. And so since my other factor for postpartum, early postpartum follow-up is breastfeeding continuation, how can we improve that? We can improve it with pilot programs with my second theme, and that's telehealth and FaceTime. And there are already a bunch of apps out there. But imagine if your nurse or the person in my office would FaceTime my patient maybe a week after she's delivered and say, well, how are you doing? The psychiatrists have done this so well with the adolescent depression. They FaceTime their patients because they can see what they look like and see how they're feeling. And there's a program for postpartum depression in Minneapolis that I've been working with, and in Milwaukee. It's called the Periscope program, where they're doing almost all of that postpartum depression follow-up through the Periscope program. These are grant-funded programs, but they should be continuation programs. So that's one of the changing paradigms that we need to see. We talked about pregnancy spacing and how important it is to improve the long-term health. And the reality is that we also need to think about that, because if you are offered a post-placental insertion of an IUD or Nexplanon as an explanations of reasons why you might want to do that, particularly if you're at high risk, we have to adapt these type of programs and make them part of our theme. And if they don't get one and they want one, then what better time to get it other than the 2 to 4 weeks after you deliver, which also decreases the expulsion rate. But screening for postpartum depression was one of the biggest reasons I changed our clinic structure. If I waited until 6 weeks to screen women for postpartum depression, knowing that they were going to be depressed, I've already missed the boat. I've missed opportunities. And so then we changed that so that every woman is screened within that 2-week period to 4-week period, and then they have the appropriate follow-up. I was fortunate because I had a social worker in my clinic. I had someone who could see them right there. That's not necessarily the paradigm. So when we're pushing this nationally, they say, well, what am I going to do about it? Well, you know, we have people that we can send people to if you're not comfortable putting patients on medication. So the system recommendation for postpartum depression is to ensure that all women, first of all, are screened, then optimize detection, referral, and treatment, and educate providers on risk factors and screening tools, and have a preconception discussion of it. So now I'm going to turn the page just a little bit to talk about what I'm on to now. So that was the first thing. We've changed the postpartum paradigm. The paper is out. Every woman is scheduled to come within 2 to 4 weeks postpartum. And then they have a follow-up within 12 weeks, which is that gateway to long-term health. That's the time for that first annual exam postpartum. So you with me? 2 visits within 12 weeks after having a baby. Why? Because every woman, as far as I'm concerned, needs to be with her baby for about 12 weeks. But again, how do we get that through the system? I don't know. The one in the gateway health. For women with gestational diabetes, for women with preeclampsia, there is already a higher risk for cardiovascular disease. For women with PCO who become pregnant, ovulation, there's a higher risk. For women who gain more weight than they should, they're a higher risk. So you're with me. Cardiovascular disease, more women die of heart disease than after a certain age than men. And so many of the pregnancy risk factors are there. Parity increases the risk beyond 3 because of the J-shaped curve that happens. And that's why intra-pregnancy interval is so important, because it decreases the risk of long-term health. So when you go into it, we know that. Women with preeclampsia have a 4-fold higher risk of developing hypertension and developing a 2-fold elevated risk for heart disease, stroke, and venous thromboembolism. So the first thing we have to do is educate women who've had it to prevent it the next time around through whatever that we need to do and so forth and so on. Women with type 2 diabetes have a 7-fold risk of developing long-term health-related risks. Women with gestational diabetes have a 7-fold risk for developing diabetes. And it's very sad to know that even in my own clinic, as you'll learn here, so few women come back for their postpartum glucose screening. And we have to improve that. If the data shows in some studies that women diagnosed with gestational diabetes, less than 25% of them within a year have actually had that screening for diabetes risk, we have to change that. And we have to do that by working with our internal medicine colleagues, our family medicine colleagues, our women's nurse practitioners, and so forth and so on. Between 50 and 65% of women who gain in excess of the recommended weight have excessive weight beyond that. So the postpartum period is a very important opportunity for us to talk about achieving a healthier weight and the relationships it has with hyperlipidemia, diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and the health disparities associated with those things. Breastfeeding counteracts some of those things automatically. Hence the reason that we have to increase breastfeeding and the breastfeeding exclusivity in minority communities, in African Americans and Hispanics, and in Native Americans. 8% of preterm deliveries, especially babies of low birth weight, there's a 2-fold greater risk for cardiovascular disease. The uterus is a smooth muscle. The heart's a smooth muscle. Think about it. If there are inflammatory factors that increase the risk for preterm birth, those same inflammatory factors are associated with cardiovascular disease. You get the message? So counseling about that becomes an issue. So the conclusions that I have for you, we have to redesign the postpartum period as the first follow-up women's visit. We look at a 6-month visit for all women with complications, whether that be through video, through telephone, through health promotions. When I had my shoulder operated on, they called me so much I got tired of hearing from them. You know, it's like, leave me alone. I'm doing fine. Think about it. So we heard stories of post-delivery, post-traumatic stress. Who was there to call? Who was there that you felt comfortable with talking to? Who was there to listen to you and your story? And so we have to talk about Institute of Medicine, ACOG guidelines, weight gain, weight loss, We create the guidelines for our colleagues in medicine and cardiology and family medicine and so forth, and include pregnancy risk factors on the past medical history. So think about it. If your internist asks you, how many pregnancies have you had, and did you have any pregnancy complications? Simple. Oh my gosh, you had preeclampsia. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. You had gestational diabetes. Let's talk about that. The visit, the timing of the visit is important. So our new paradigm is that visit occurs at 2 to 4 weeks. An infant feeding plan, a reproductive life plan, pregnancy complications need to take on a major emphasis, mental health issues, post-traumatic delivery issues, postpartum problems, chronic health conditions. All of those are the reasons to change the paradigm. And the natural candidates for early follow-up are women with hypertension, women with postpartum depression or history of depression, women who've had cesarean deliveries, women who are having lactation challenges, women who've had perineal wound injuries and chronic conditions, whether they be seizures, hypertension, rheumatoid disorders, etc., etc. Health policy. We've got to have coverage beyond 6 weeks. And I'm reviewing all of these work Medicaid requirements. And you know, many of my patients on Medicaid already work. They're pregnant and they're working, they just can't. And so when you're going to make the rules more restrictive for them to start looking for a job within 4 weeks after having a baby, what's up? It's punitive. It's punitive. And we have to remind people that Medicaid is a health insurance program. It's not a welfare program. And that's the thing. We have to be seamless handovers of care. We have to disseminate to providers, to the public, and to the payers. We have to monitor and incentivize compliances. We have to fund research to improve long-term health in women. And we have to work with our colleagues, and hence the reason that I wrote a paper with the president of the American Heart Association on promoting risk identification and reduction of cardiovascular disease in women through collaborations with OBGYNs, internists, family physicians, and cardiologists. And with that, we got to remember what we can do is to educate. We have to do the regular screenings. We have to be comfortable with medications, whether they be antidepressants, antihypertensive, lipid-lowering drugs, folic acid, etc. And that's the paradigm for change that I wanted to present to you all today. So thank you. This is a wonderful conference, and I'm just excited about being part of it and to be able to kind of celebrate my theme going forward. Thanks a lot.
Level, because our next speaker, Dr. Neil Shaw, who is Assistant Professor of OBGYN and Reproductive Systems at Harvard Medical School, and perhaps even more pertinent to what he'll be talking about today, he's at Ariadne Labs, and there is Director of the Delivery Decision Making. He's also, and even more relevant, a member of the board of March for Moms. Neil is known in all circles that I know him through to be an extraordinarily kind, compassionate human being and provider, and beyond that, he's a mover and a shaker when it comes to understanding and doing something about systems change. And we've asked him to talk about disruption. That's what we need right now, right? Disrupt, innovate, what it takes to galvanize systems change. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Lois. I probably, like the rest of you, am still reflecting on what we've just heard, and so I can't help but just start there a little bit. I mean, starting with Linda. So I mean, this is a large topic. How do you disrupt? How do you innovate? And it largely starts with asking the right questions. And the way that I heard your call to action, Linda, at the very end at least, was asking fundamentally the right question, which is, how do we actually invest in the well-being of women at a level that reflects how much we truly value them in society? That's the first thing. That is the question at the end of the day. And then, in order to answer it, those of us who are in positions of power, in varying degrees, have to be able to get off of our defensive haunches and let go. That's what disruption is. It's embracing letting go. And so we have to be able to see the humanity in the services that we're providing in order to truly see the mistakes. And so stories like Phyllis's, lines like, because you're pregnant with diabetes, we can't let you move. Or, at 3 years old, I'm still, going through my postpartum experience. And that ultimately helps get to the sort of plane that Haywood is on, where you're sort of more enlightened and you can see what the systemic causes of all this. But here's really what I wanted to say. I think it's all actually fairly simple. A couple of things. The first is picking up where Lois left off. The dominant cause of suffering in the world right now is not lack of knowledge. It's lack of execution on the knowledge that we already have. And so all of us who care about reducing suffering have a set of decisions that we have to make. To the extent that this is meant to be a turning point meeting, we have to decide, all of us, are we only going to invest our limited time and energy and resources in promulgating ideas, or are we also going to invest in the follow-through of translating those ideas into action? And that has different implications for different people who are here, so I'll call you out. If you are the National Institutes of Health, academics, are we primarily going to invest in large-scale tests of effectiveness in highly controlled settings? Or are we also going to invest in the feasibility of implementing those ideas in a number of different contexts, which is harder and more expensive and riskier? For those of us who are healthcare improvers, are we primarily going to spend our time collating best practices and then expecting people to adopt them, or are we going to truly co-create better ways forward with the people and the communities that we serve? And those seem like rhetorical questions for the people in this room, but they're genuine ones, because the world is sort of set up in a way where, at least for me, in academic medicine, promulgating ideas and doing randomized controlled trials is where the existing award system is. It's not really in what I've spent most of the last decade trying to do, which is think about failures of execution. So I just want to offer a couple of things that I think that I've learned over the last decade about dealing with execution failure that may be useful in further brainstorming at this meeting. The first is that when it comes to failures of execution, there are 2 ways that we hurt people. One is when we do too little too late, and the other is when we do too much too soon. And we need to retain the capacity to think about both at the exact same time. Because the last several decades of trying to make people better off have solely dealt with the too little too late problem. And they've led to a place where 99% of American women deliver on labor and delivery units that look like intensive care units run by surgeons. And as a consequence of that, 1 in 3 Americans gets major abdominal surgery to give birth, and 1 in 10 babies goes to the NICU. So we have to be able to think about both. The second is that, and I think this is already emerging out of the conversation this morning, is that we can't be designing solutions just within what we've called silos here, but really sort of the traditional lines of diabetes care, cardiovascular care, et cetera care. When people are vulnerable to the types of harms that we care about, there are particular periods of their lives where they're vulnerable. And the one that's relevant to this conversation is the period of everybody's life where you're trying to start or grow your family. And that sort of brings us to the next lesson, I think, which is that safety cannot be the goal. That's the floor of what we should expect. Part of being disruptive is really envisioning the whole thing that people deserve, the ceiling. Right? People have goals in labor other than simply emerging on stage. And so we need to attend to that. We need to make sure that people are getting care that's not just safe, but also supportive and empowering in all the ways that that matters. And when you really sort of step back and think about it, every person deserves to start or grow their family with dignity. And really to do that, you have to be able to access care that's not just safe, but also supportive and empowering, and reliably so. And this is something that we fall short on in every geographic corridor of this country and every segment of society, from the Upper East Side of Manhattan to Tulsa, Oklahoma to Tampa, Florida. The fourth is that if we really care about equity as part of all of this, it has to be a primary goal. It can't be the afterthought. And that might seem obvious, but it's really not the way things work right now. You can move the needle on average and make things better on average, and actually make disparities worse, right? Because usually the people who are the most willing to adopt an innovation are the ones who are most able to. So just because people seem really ready to adopt something in Nashville doesn't mean you shouldn't start in Memphis, because the people in Memphis can do it, the people in Nashville definitely can do it, even if it's harder. And finally, I think as people who are interested in disruption and innovation, we have to start thinking like product developers, not just idea developers. And we have to make sure that we're not just creating products, but actual marketplaces to receive them. Because we have a ton of ideas, and then we don't really have people that are ready and willing and able to receive them. And so I know that's a little bit of an abstract idea, but what I really mean by that is two things: to create a marketplace for supporting women and maternal health. We need to be able to create an aligned value proposition for everybody involved, which means, it turns out childbirth is the #1 reason for hospitalization in this country. So 25% of all hospitalizations are either a mom or a baby. And that means that we spend 0.6% of our $17 trillion GDP just on hospitalizing people for childbirth. And yet, whether it's the NICHD or really any other investor in maternal well-being, it's really a sliver of where the investment is. So how do we go from a place where for Amazon or Microsoft, childbirth is the #1 cost, to actually getting them to sort of pay for the innovation that we require? And the other thing that it really requires is driving demand among the end users. Most people know what their pain points are, but they don't truly know what they deserve, because people will appropriate whether we give them a dignified way of doing it or not. And so whatever the status quo is normal. People are disrespected and abused in most settings. They consider it to be normal. In a place where 1 in 3 people get major abdominal surgery and 1 in 10 babies go to the NICU, most of us have sort of accepted that as normal. So we've got to get to a place where that's possible too. And that's why I'm glad there's so many people who are here wearing their hats as what we call patients, but just primarily as people first. So that's really all I have to say. Thanks very much.